Michelle Bachelet, the UN's human rights chief, warned this week that Myanmar today reminds her of Syria at the beginning of its own horrific civil war. She points to the brutality, the spiraling violence, and most importantly, perhaps, the world community's feeble response to both conflicts. Is it a fair comparison? Will Myanmar become the next Syria? Clarrisa Ward is CNN's chief international correspondent and the author of On All Fronts. She's a veteran Syria reporter who is recently back from Myanmar. She was granted access by the Tatmadaw, Myanmar's military, which seized power on February the 1st in a coup. Welcome, Clarrisa.
Thank you, Fred.
So I know, when you go into these kinds of circumstances, it's extraordinarily heroic, but you are often surrounded by government minders and security. Were you able to was there any point at which you felt as though you were able to get a sense of how people on the ground in Myanmar are reacting to this fairly brutal crackdown?
Well, our expectations were very limited for exactly the reasons you say. We were surrounded by minders, a convoy of soldiers. We had plainclothes security officers filming our every move. We had translators, you name it, we had it. And so we didn't anticipate that we would be able to really interact with ordinary people. But we had this extraordinary moment where we finally were given permission just to shoot some video in a market, a simple, ordinary market, simple, ordinary people. And within minutes of us taking out our camera, even though we were so clearly surrounded by security forces, one man flashed the three-finger Hunger Games salute. That salute has become the symbol of defiance against the military coup. And then he came up to us. I asked him, why did you show us that gesture? He said, because we want justice. And then another man came up and said, we're not frightened. And then another woman came up and said, we want democracy. We don't want to go back to the dark age. And there was this profoundly humbling and moving moment where I suddenly heard the entire market was galvanized with the sound of people banging pots and pans. That's, of course, a sort of old tradition to ward off evil spirits, but it's become the signature sound of resistance in Myanmar. And I was so struck by the extraordinary courage of people who were able to demand democracy and dignity, even standing right in front of our junta minders and guards.
Now, we do know that the Chinese and the Russians have supported the military. What's striking to me is even the neighboring democracies like India and Indonesia have not raised any protests. It seems as though the military has the external support that they need, or certainly no real external pressure.
And that's why people were so desperate to talk to us, because there is a sense of crushing disappointment from the people in Myanmar that the international community is not able to act in concert and condemn universally what's happening and essentially put a stop to it. This is to be expected, many would say, of China and Russia. We've seen them adopt this kind of a stance to hamstring the UN Security Council before. But as you said, it's those Southeast Asian nations that I think have also generated a huge amount of disappointment, people really wanting to see them come out and condemn the violence, condemn the coup. They're not seeing that, and that's exactly why they're losing hope in the process of the international community being able to do anything to remedy this situation.
I want to ask you about that comparison to Syria, because one of the reasons that Syria became so very bloody was that the regime and others exploited the many deep cleavages within Syrian society between the Alawites and the Sunnis, between the Islamists and ISIS and the secularists. Myanmar has lots of ethnic diversity, lots of different groups, and of course the Rohingya. Is it likely? Can you imagine a kind of downward spiral where it becomes really a kind of all against all civil war?
I can, but not exactly for the reasons that you're describing. There's no question that actually the Tatmadaw tried to exploit some of those divisions and tried to woo some of these ethnic groups. That appears to have backfired, and they're not playing ball. But when I look at the scenes that I saw of ordinary people who are basically willing to risk everything, march into a hail of bullets to demand democracy and to demand dignity, and when I look at a regime that is essentially willing to kill its way into victory, to destroy its own country, to protect its own interests, and then you also have the complexity of many different ethnic groups. And on top of that, the sort of ineffectiveness of the international community standing on the sidelines, wringing its hands, issuing statements and condemnations, but not really being able to effect any forceful kind of robust action. That is what makes my stomach drop and my heart ache when I think of the potential for Myanmar to devolve into a bloody civil war along the lines of Syria.
Powerful and courageous reporting. Clarrisa Ward, thank you so much.
Thank you.